Today, I found this tape of Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill and Senate candidates, Republican Todd Akin and Libertarian Jonathan Dine, and the debate they participated in.
Let me introduce to you today our candidates. We have, to my left, Republican Congressman Todd Akin. In the middle, Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill. And at the end, Libertarian candidate Jonathan Dine. Let me also introduce to you today our panel of journalists who will be joining me in asking questions today of the candidates. We have Nassim Benchabon, a student at the University of Missouri. We have Bill Miller of the Washington Missourian, and Jeff Fox of the Independent Examiner. Now let me briefly go over the rules of our debate today. The candidates drew numbers in advance to determine their speaking order. They will each have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Candidates will have 90 seconds to answer each question, with a 45-second rebuttal at the option of the moderator. I will ask the first question, then our panelists will take turns asking questions. At the end of the debate, candidates will have 2 minutes for closing statements. For the members of the audience, we ask that you silence your phones, remain seated during the debate, and hold your applause until the end. Okay? Well, let's get started then. We're ready for our opening statements, and Congressman Akin, you're first. Go ahead.
Well, thank you all very much for allowing us to have this chance to talk about things that matter, about our families and about our country. I'm an engineer. I served as an officer in the Army and worked for IBM, where I met my dear wife of 37 years. We have 6 children, 8 grandchildren. 3 of my sons went to the Naval Academy, served in the Marine Corps, and one of them is in the Mediterranean right now. I'm also fortunate to have both of my parents alive. Dad's 91. He served under Patton, World War II, and he's actually joining us right here in this convention. And as you can imagine, I have a great love for our country and for the American dream and the things that made us who we are. But my sense is that things are not all right. If you take a look at gasoline prices, for example, they're double what they were a few years ago, and the food prices and things are up, and to compensate for that you'd think there'd be jobs, but the fact is the jobs aren't there, and the numbers are much worse than what the government is saying. We also have the $16 trillion of debt, a trillion plus deficit every year, and all of these things are like little red lights on the dashboard telling you something is not right. And I believe that we have forgotten the secret of what made America such a special country. And that is something which we see being destroyed right in front of our very eyes. We see a Washington, D.C., which has got more and more red tape and bureaucracy and agencies and executive orders and taxes and everything, and they're basically crushing freedom in America. So your choice in this election is either more freedom as I have voted, or more Washington, D.C. It's your choice. More freedom or more Washington.
Claire McCaskill.
Thank you to the Press Association. It is great to be here, and thank you to both Todd and Jonathan for being here today. This election is going to be quite a contrast for the Missourians, but not because we're at opposite ends, Todd and me. I'm in the middle. It's just he's so far on the fringe. That's where the contrast comes in. There have been many comments made in this campaign by Congressman Akin that I find unacceptable. But it's his views that will be painful for Missouri families. I'm proud of my strong moderate record in the United States Senate, where I've worked with many Republicans to do important things, like cutting spending, putting a cap on federal spending, like banning earmarks, like cutting taxes, over $1 trillion for small businesses and working families. cleaning up war contracting, and protecting and promoting American jobs. Todd has worked closely with Michelle Bachmann, and together, them and a few others have really pushed things that would really harm Missouri families. On March 8th of 2011, Todd Akin said, "I don't like Social Security. I think it's a bad investment." He's gone on in this campaign to delineate what is the triple whammy to Social Security. Not only does he not like it, he would privatize it, put it on the roller coaster of Wall Street. He would raise the retirement age, and he would lower the benefit. On August 18th of 2011, he said Medicare was unconstitutional. And since that time, he has, in fact, voted several times to voucherize Medicare, to turn seniors over to private insurance companies, to arm wrestle with them for coverage and whether their claims will be paid, and make them go in their pocket for more than $6,000 a year. I believe we can lower the deficit and debt, but we will not do it. We should not do it. We cannot do it at the expense of these important programs for seniors.
Jonathan Dine.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. I want to give a big thanks to the Missouri Press Association for hosting this debate and giving me the opportunity to introduce myself to the voters of Missouri. My name is Jonathan Dine, and I'm the Libertarian candidate for the United States Senate. Like many of you, I'm tired of the constant fighting of the Republicans and Democrats. Beating the other team has become more important than finding solutions to America's problems. America is now on the verge of a financial collapse, and both parties are to blame with their reckless tax, borrow, and spend policies. Neither party is seriously about balancing the budget or lowering your taxes or restoring your personal freedom. For as long as I can remember, and most of you as well, Republican and Democrat politicians have offered up solutions. But America's problems have only gotten worse. Higher and higher taxes, more intrusions in your business and your personal life. Enough is enough. As a Libertarian senator, I will stand up for your personal freedom. I'm socially accepting and tolerant. I will stand up for marriage equality, the legalization of marijuana. I'm also fiscally responsible. I want the government to be a good steward of your tax dollars. I'm tired of the reckless spending and the reckless earmarks. As your senator, I will vote no to reckless spending, vote no to any legislation where spending exceeds revenue. I will also advocate on the part of a balanced budget amendment. The government should live within its means, just like the people of Missouri. Supporting my candidacy means supporting a drastically smaller government and lower tax level across the board. We do not need politicians telling us who we can love, what to do with our own money, or what we can do with our own body. Be Libertarian with me, November 6th.
Thank you. It is now time to turn to our question segment. I will ask the first question. It will go first to Congressman Todd Akin. The Missouri Senate race was thrust into the national spotlight last month after a remark that Congressman Akin made about women's bodies having ways of avoiding pregnancy in cases of legitimate rape. The congressman has apologized repeatedly. So to what extent should this comment still matter? And in what context do you think voters should consider it on Election Day?
Well, I've answered this question repeatedly, and I don't believe that this election overall is about talk, but it's really about two visions of what America is. Are we going to go down the path of Greece that constantly has a bigger government, always taxing more and basically destroying their economy? Or are we going to go the path that America has always been on, a path where we allow freedom, where we allow the American dream to flourish, where we don't crush it under the burden of Washington, D.C.? And that's the choice of two different Americas. Now, it seems to me that what a senator should be doing is taking the common sense that you and I know that's here in Missouri and taking that to Washington, D.C., instead of dragging all of this stuff from Washington, D.C. and dumping it onto the state of Missouri and killing jobs, destroying our economy, and crushing the American dream. That's what this election is really about. It's not about words. It's about two different voting records that are the exact opposite. Claire can say that she's a 50%er, but when you vote with 98% of the time with Obama and then tell us that you're a regular middle-of-the-roader, that takes a lot of guts. I got to give her credit for that.
Corey McCaskill, to what extent should the comment still matter, and in what context do you think voters should consider it on Election Day?
You know, I think Congressman Akin's comments opened the window to his views for Missourians. He has apologized for those comments, but they say a lot about how he views things, and that's where Missourians need to pay attention. I believe a rape victim should be allowed to have emergency contraception in order to avoid pregnancy. Todd Akin does not. I believe his view is extreme and out of the mainstream for most Missourians. But there's other extreme views. He wants to abolish the minimum wage, the floor for the middle class in this great country. He wants to do away with student loans. Think what would happen to Columbia, Missouri, if the only kids who could get college loans were the rich kids, the only kids who could go to college were the rich kids, or the talented athletes, or the superstar academics. He wants to privatize Medicare, privatize Social Security. He wants to do away with the student lunch program. He is one of a handful. I think there were 4 or 5 members of the United States Congress that voted to eliminate the child nutrition program. I think the vote was something like 416 to 5. I don't think that's the mainstream, compromise, willing to fix problems attitude that we need to send to Washington. All that's going to do is contribute to more gridlock. So it's not what he said that is the problem. It's what he believes that's the problem.
Jonathan Dine.
Like many of you, I found Akin's comments insulting and insensitive to the victims of rape, just insinuating that their crime or their victimized was not in some sense legitimate. I believe it shows that career politicians have grown too secluded in Washington and have forgotten what life is like outside of politics. I was astonished to find that Akin sits on the science committee, yet he fails to understand basic 8th grade biology. What I think it does is really illustrates the point that we have 535 people who are to regulate everything but produce nothing. We really need to step back and understand that his views and the views of an individual shouldn't be regulated by the government. He speaks for smaller government, yet he wants to push government morality on other individuals because they choose a different way of life. As your senator, I think the issues of abortion are usually a wedge issue to take away and distract from the important issues like balancing the budget, reining in the spending, ending the wars, and restoring your personal freedom. So step back and take a look at the important issues.
Congressman Akin, there were several characterizations of your positions there. Would you like to offer a chance to rebuttal that?
Yes, I would, please. Yeah, there were a few, weren't there? Let's start with a couple of really basic things. If you don't believe the federal government should do everything, it doesn't mean that you don't believe in it. You know, the question is, do you want the federal government to take over everything that's important? I don't think so. My comments about student loans were, why don't we leave it the way it was a couple of years ago, where private lenders could be involved in student loans? Just because you believe in private lenders doesn't mean you don't believe in student loans. Or school lunches. Is it okay to say maybe that should be done by the state of Missouri? Does it mean you're against school lunches if you don't want the federal government to do it? The mindset here is the federal government has to do everything for us all the time. You want to talk about Medicare? Let's talk about votes. Let's talk about somebody who voted to take $700 billion out of Medicare and then wants to crusade as the big hero of Medicare. I don't understand that.
Claire McCaskill, he's raised the issue of you wanting to take $700 billion out of Medicare. Your chance on rebuttal there.
Well, 2 things on rebuttal. First, no one's saying private lenders can't lend to students. They can do that right now. They just didn't want to do it unless the federal government was backing them up and they were making a cut off of it. So all we did say was take out the middleman who's taking a cut with no risk. I would think Congressman Akin would appreciate that. And put that money towards helping more students. No one's keeping banks from loaning to students now. Secondly, on the Medicare cuts, this is the biggest whopper of this campaign season. It is unbelievable to me that Congressman Akin would vote time and time again for those same $700 billion in Medicare savings. As President Clinton says, it takes a lot of brass to be against something that you're for. He knows that the Ryan budget took that same savings, but you know what they did with the savings? They gave another tax cut to Kim Kardashian. They gave another tax cut to LeBron James. They gave another tax cut to Donald Trump instead of doing what we need to do with that money, and that is strengthening the Medicare program.
Jonathan Dine, would you like your 45 seconds here?
I'm okay.
All right. We could go on rebuttal all day, but we must move on to the next round of questions here. Nassim, you're next with a question, and it goes first to Senator Claire McCaskill.
In the past 11 years, average prices for undergraduate tuition, room and board at public colleges and universities have risen 42%, according to the U.S. Department of Education. What specific policy do you propose as the most efficient solution to the declining affordability of public higher education?
Well, I would tell you that it's not to eliminate the Department of Education, and that's what Congressman Akin wants to do. As I just indicated in that rebuttal, I didn't need to use that time in that rebuttal if I'd known this question was coming. What we did is we took the middleman out of the student loans and took that cut they were making with no risk because the federal government was backing those loans, and we took that money and increased the amount of the Pell Grants, which allows more kids to get to college. And this is the land of opportunity. This is where we believe that anybody can do anything and that personal freedom is very important. But to get to that next rung of the ladder, there's a lot of families that can't get their kids to college. I don't want to shut that door for them. So it's important, I think, that we keep the Pell Grants in place. It's a big contrast between me and Congressman Akin. I think we also have to pay attention to student tuition. It is, I think, bad that we are not investing more in higher education at the state and local level. Unlike many others, I think we should raise the cigarette tax. I'm embarrassed that the cigarette tax is the lowest in the country. Our cigarette tax is 17 cents a pack. We could raise it by almost $1 and still be the cheapest cigarettes in the Midwest and have that money go directly to help with higher education to keep those tuition rates down.
Jonathan Dine.
Education should be getting cheaper, not more expensive. With the advent of cheaper computers, electronics are more easily readable. I would like to open up the door for entrepreneurs to come into education. Our education system has become too rigid, and it doesn't allow for people to come in and offer a better service, a better product, but we need to look at why the reason tuition prices are raising. I believe that easy to secure government loans have actually increased the price of college. With kids receiving more money, college institutions have increased the price. If there wasn't as much money being lent out, college campuses would be empty and would be forced to lower the price of tuition. I think that greed has played a big price. I would like to work on investing in education. I think it is something that's important, but it should be done at the state and local level, not the federal government.
Todd Akin.
Well, thank you for a good question here. And this is one that really affects a whole lot of people. There was a young man in my office just the other day, and he said, "Wow, I'm glad I'm out of college, but I do owe $100,000, and I'm looking for a job." And I thought, how hard it is to try to save $100,000 for that undergraduate degree. How many years it's going to take to try to set that money aside. This is a big problem, and it's affecting a whole lot of people. But the question is then, why is it that college education is just spiraling up in its costs? Part of it is because of the government. When the government keeps getting into things, it affects the marketplace. And what's happening is the government is giving these loans and encouraging the prices to go up. And where does that stop? So we're putting people into an incredible vice by the government using more and more money to do things, killing jobs, and then facing kids with a completely impossible choice. You want an education, but you can't pay for it. So this is a real tension, but this is an example of us doubling down on failure. When the government gets into things, a lot of times it messes them up. The classic example is Freddie and Fannie and the entire economic mess we're in, which is created by the government deciding to get involved in home mortgages. How many more things do we want to inject the government in? They're the ones that are driving these costs, and we need to let a little free enterprise work.
All right, our next question will come from Bill Miller and go first to Jonathan Dine.
The U.S. Postal Service is very important to most of the people in this room today. It is now trying to go into a program that would, it's an advertising program that would compete and be unfair to newspapers. In many cases, the newspaper is the largest customer for the post office in the community. And what I'd like to know is what is your position on this issue and the other issues of closing rural post offices and eliminating Saturday delivery? What's your position on this? What would you do in the Senate to help rural newspapers and community newspapers that depend on the Postal Service?
Like many of the things run by the government, the Postal Office is one of them that's very inefficient. I have a friend who works for the Post Office as a mail carrier. He gets 4 days straight of 10 hours a day, so that every day, every time he's needed, he gets more overtime. So the federal government, instead of hiring, or the Postal Service, instead of hiring new individuals, will prefer to pay double time or time and a half to one individual, wasting more money instead of hiring more people and creating more jobs. I think that the Postal Service should cut costs if it's to remain around. We need to maybe even increase the price of a stamp, and I would be in favor of closing Postal Service on Saturday. We are in a fiscal crisis. We do need to make some tough choices, and if one of them is cutting back on some of the services, we can wait till Monday to receive our mail.
Todd Akin.
Well, let me say, first of all, the Postal Service is something that's constitutional. Government's supposed to be doing that. And I think all of you have grown up knowing the postman. You hope he's going to bring a letter from somebody special, or you're expecting a package that you ordered, and you're waiting and just hoping that the postman's going to bring it. And I think there's some of the, just sort of a part of American tradition. But there is a principle involved here. And that is, I think that the best way when the government's doing something is to have each thing sit on its own base. That way we all know that we're not transferring money from one thing to another thing or covering up something. So I believe that the Postal Service needs to be following that kind of principle, and that is the amount of money that's being charged in stamps, and the service that they provide needs to match the cost of providing those services. And that's the best way to solve this and all kinds of other questions. That's one of the reasons why, for instance, we have a gasoline tax, because the gasoline tax pays for the roads. If you don't want to pay the gasoline tax, don't buy so much gasoline. And so things sit on their own base. And I believe that's probably the best principle overall to deal with the questions in the post office. Thank you.
Claire McCaskill.
I'm going to try to quote Todd Akin exactly on this. I think he said, we can keep raising the prices, and if they get too high, the private sector can take over. I disagree. It is in the Constitution, and I will tell you, we have had the finest and the most reliable and the most comprehensive and universal postal service in the world. They have cut billions in expenses over the last several years. They have shrunk their workforce. They have become much more efficient. But what they've been required to do is pre-fund their pensions and health care for 75 years. No one in the private sector is required to pre-fund their pensions and health care for 75 years. No one in the governmental sector, except the post office, is required to do that. And it's got them into a cash flow problem. We have to uncuff them and allow them to be more entrepreneurial, particularly when it comes to the growth area of Postal Service, which is package delivery. And I will tell you, Mr. Miller, you know this, and many in this audience know this because you're from rural communities. A rural post office is more than bricks and mortar. I grew up, as a daughter of rural Missouri, I grew up in Houston and Lebanon, Missouri. I still remember where the post offices were in those communities because it's a place that the community came together and felt united. And 6-day delivery is important in rural Missouri for seniors that need their medicine, for businesses that must utilize the Postal Service in order to exist in rural Missouri. The bill is bipartisan. It saves money. It is in the Senate. And Congressman Akin is part of the gridlock that won't pass it. I would ask you, Congressman Akin, go back to Washington. Stop campaigning. Go back to Washington and help us pass the postal bill.
Congressman Akin, would you like a rebuttal time?
I think that's a good idea. First of all, I think I heard what the answer was. Well, if you can't make the thing work, well, we'll just take some money from somewhere else to help pay for it. I don't know that that's a very responsible solution. And the idea of the fact that the rural post offices are important, I never said they weren't important. I think they're great. But I think the point of the matter is there has to be some kind of fiscal responsibility. And it's not responsible to say, take all of this stuff that you want and we're just going to somehow make money up here. That's where we're going. And because of policies like that and thinking like that from Claire McCaskill, that's why we're running over $1 trillion that we don't have, trying to spend it every year. And you want to talk about gridlock, let's talk about the Senate. It is completely stuck. It hadn't done any budget for 1,200 days.
Senator McCaskill, your rebuttal time.
Let me just tackle the budget real quickly. And by the way, this bill is fiscally responsible to save the post offices. It doesn't take any tax dollars. It continues to make the post office reliant on their income. But on the budget, Congressman Akin knows that last summer, instead of passing a resolution that the appropriators absolutely ignore every year, the only way you spend money in Washington is with an appropriations bill. It's not the budget resolution. All the budget resolution does is advisory, and appropriators usually ignore it, as Todd knows. We passed a law last year, signed into law, that limited the size of the budget for 2 years. And it actually says in the law, if you go to McCaskill.senate.gov, you can read it, that this will substitute for the budget resolutions for 2 years. We did that because we wanted to put a lid on the appropriators and keep that spending down as a matter of law for 2 years. This is a political talking point, and it's an unfair one.
Okay, it's time for our next question. It will come from Jeff Fox and go first to Congressman Todd Akin.
Good morning. An estimated 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. That has dramatic effects on Medicare. What is the best approach to put Medicare on a permanently secure financial footing?
Putting Medicare on a firm financial footing is going to, first of all, involve repealing Obamacare. Look, let's take a look at what Obamacare does to Medicare. First thing it does is it cuts $700 billion out of Medicare. It's pretty hard to say you're in favor of Medicare and cut $700 billion out of it. But let's take a look at the second thing it does, which is even worse. It creates a 15-person IPAB board that will effectively be the people deciding who gets medical treatment and who doesn't. This is rationing. This is government rationing. Now, if you want Medicare to work properly, what we need to do is to get away from the concept that the government has to do everything, solve everything. Because in Medicare right now, the government sets the prices of the cost of everything in medicine. And we don't want the government setting prices. What, in fact, I think we should do is to allow a series of different people to offer medical care to seniors and let them choose which one they want. It's a whole lot better to choose between different providers than to have the choice of only the federal government. And so I think we need to get rid of the price setting, which never works. You can go back to 1600 in England. It never works. The government shouldn't be price setting. Just allow providers to offer the service to seniors so they have choices. Thank you.
Claire McCaskill.
The Affordable Health Care Act, known as Obamacare, does not cut one dime in Medicare benefits. Not one dime. It realizes savings by taking some of the big profits away from the insurance companies, the corporate welfare that they were making off Medicare Advantage. It lowers some of the reimbursements to hospitals because it depends on the fact we're going to have more paying customers. But it doesn't cut a dime of Medicare benefits. And by the way, once again, it's the same $700 billion that he voted for in the Ryan plan a couple of times. It closes the donut hole, and it extends the solvency of Medicare for 8 years. Now, what I didn't hear in Congressman Akin's answer was his plan. His plan is to privatize Medicare. He wants to give seniors a voucher, and once you spend your voucher, you're on your own. You're on your own. If the premiums go up, you can't afford it, you're on your own. Your medicine goes up, you can't afford it, you're on your own. Now, how do we fix it? There's a couple of things we've got to do. One, we need to do some more aggressive means testing. I know it's political season. I'm not supposed to say that we're going to do anything like that, but I believe in it. I don't think we can afford to buy Donald Trump's prescription drugs. He can buy his own. We're doing that now. We can means test some of the Medicare programs and enact some of the savings programs that are working. St. John's Hospital in Springfield on a pilot program took their Medicare population, and with quality control and customer satisfaction, they were able to reduce, through managing the care more carefully, $17 million in Medicare payments that were owed. As a result, they got a bonus of $4 million. That's incentivizing. That's what we need to do in a capitalistic system, is incentivizing prevention and spending less money rather than incentivizing more treatment.
Jonathan Dine.
Like many of the government entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, are all coming to a cusp. They're coming towards a financial cliff where we're not going to be able to save them if we don't make some drastic cuts now. I would propose block granting the states money based on population to deliver health care for seniors and people over 55. I feel that the states would be more close to the people of the state, actually more apt to listen to the legislators and provide you with a better service for your dollars. I think that anytime you expect the government to manage your money efficiently, we can just look at the record of spending money recklessly with mismanagement. I feel that we really need to make some tough choices or we will all be left with nothing.
Congressman Akin, Senator McCaskill had characterized your position as privatizing Medicare and giving seniors vouchers. Would you like to respond to that in your rebuttal time?
Sure. The idea is that the senior has a choice in medicine. That's the idea. Instead of having one size fits all, which is the big government solution. We're trying to allow choices. Look, there's one thing in medicine that I don't like, and that's when an insurance company gets between the doctor and the patient. But there's one thing worse, and that's when the federal government gets between the doctor and the patient. And I don't support, and neither did 71% of the Missouri public support, the bright idea of having the efficiency of the federal government and the compassion of the IRS running our health care. I'm opposed to that. I voted 30 times to repeal it, and when I get to the Senate, I'll be the one that votes to make sure it gets repealed totally.
Clay McCaskill, would you like your additional 45 seconds there?
Well, I think it's important to remember that there is a lot of misinformation about this bill. There's not a government plan in it. It's all private insurance, and there's good things in it. And you need to remember what Congressman Akin wants to repeal. He wants to repeal the ability of insurance companies to say you're out of luck because you've had the nerve to be sick before. He wants to repeal kids being able to stay on their policies until they're 26 years old. He wants to repeal a focus on free prevention so we can avoid serious health care costs down the line. He wants to repeal the insurance companies having some rules of the road and having to refund your premiums if they decide to spend most of their money on more people to deny your claims rather than on your health care. I think if Missourians will give this legislation a chance, they're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Okay, the next question comes from Nassim, and it goes first to Senator Claire McCaskill.
What current issue in federal government do you feel least prepared to address as a U.S. Senator, and how might you better prepare yourself to deal with it?
And I'm first?
You are, yes.
Well, I hope I am prepared since I have been blessed to serve the state of Missouri for 6 years. But I think the thing that prepares me the most, day in and day out, is my focus on being here in Missouri and traveling Missouri. When most senators were avoiding town halls because the debate had gotten intense and sometimes vitriolic, I was out there doing town halls on the health care bill. I've done so many tours around the state on veterans benefits, on agriculture, on manufacturing. What really prepares me best for my work is staying in constant contact with the people, because that's what this is about. It's not about me and a fancy job or a big title. It's about Missourians and who's protecting them and the programs that matter to them. Who's looking out after them and making sure that we do reduce spending and get rid of wasteful earmarks. One of the reasons I knew we had to work on veterans benefits was because I spent time out in the veterans community. One of the reasons I understood we had to get rid of earmarks is I actually heard from Missourians about how unfair it was that congressmen were supplanting their judgment for local planning on highway projects. That is what prepares me most to do my job. It's working with and listening to the people of the state that I love.
Jonathan Dine?
I'm not a career politician. I am just a regular, ordinary American like many of you, and I'm concerned with the direction that a country's heading in. Our career politicians don't seem to be serious about actually addressing the problems facing our nation. They're more concerned with getting reelected than facing the controversial issues. The thing that prepares me for this job is just being from the ground level. I understand I have an open mind and will listen to the people of the state. So when I vote on bills or propose legislation, I'll represent the people of Missouri and not a party or a lobbyist. I think one of the biggest problems with America is the career politician. And I think we need term limits across the board. 2 6-year terms for a senator and 6 2-year terms for a congressman is enough. Congress should be a revolving door of fresh ideas. Too much stagnation and entrenchment in our government has brought us to where we are now.
Todd Akin?
Look, no matter how much you work and prepare and study, when you're working in Congress, you're going to get issues that you just don't know that much about because there's so much going on. In fact, we run into that all the time. And our job is then to get up to speed on the issue and try to render a good judgment on it. I'll give you an example. The things that are most difficult vote-wise are the ones that you're not quite sure what the answer is when you first hear it. On the Wall Street bailout, all of a sudden we were approached, and Paulson looked like he was about to disintegrate. And he's saying the whole world economy is going to collapse unless you give us $700 billion in unmarked bills in a brown paper bag. And we had to make a decision. He gave us 2 lousy choices. Common sense in Missouri says look for a third solution. And so you have to do some research and study something that you're not sure of. And once you figure out what's going on, in this case we didn't need to buy Goldman Sachs at double book value, you find out that there's basically a principle behind all things. And you have to basically focus on that principle, put the politics aside, and do the right thing for the people of our state, for our families, and for our nation. And if people and party bosses don't like it, that's too bad, because our job is quite simply find the principle, do the right thing, and then you know what? A year or 2 later, the politics is gone, and somebody asks you, why did you vote no on it? It's because we could have changed accounting rules and fixed the problem without spending $700 billion. Start with the principle, do the right thing.
Okay, our next question will come from Bill Miller, and go first to Jonathan Dine.
Are you satisfied with this country's foreign policy in dealing with Iraq and Afghanistan? If you're not satisfied, what do you think President Obama and his advisors should consider in the way of changes?
I am not satisfied. As a libertarian, I seek a world at peace with other nations. I believe I look to Thomas Jefferson's quote for inspiration on foreign policy. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. I believe that America should stop acting as the world's policeman and take care of our borders and secure our country first. I do believe in a strong national defense, but the optimum word is defense, not offense. We don't have the money to continue the wars. We're wasting over $1 trillion since 2001 just on bombs. I think our money could be more wisely spent here at home.
Todd Akin.
It's important to have a foreign policy to start with. You have to have some basic principles, guidelines, and perspectives of where you want to go as a president in terms of foreign policy. That needs to include Iraq, it needs to include Afghanistan, it needs to include a whole lot of other countries as well. And the problem is that we haven't had that. In fact, what it seems like the weak and vacillating policies we've had have almost punished our friends and helped our enemies. Right off the bat, we decided to turn our back on 2 of our allies, the Czech Republic and Poland, where we had plans to build missile defense. Instead, we gave that as a concession to Russia. How much has Russia helped us on Iran? How much has Russia helped us in, for instance, the situation in Afghanistan or other places? And giving special attention to Chavez and then turning our back on the Netanyahu when he wanted to meet with the president, one of our allies. The sending of mixed signals is very destructive to foreign policy, and you have to first of all start with something that's strong. In the case of Egypt, for instance, we've talked a little bit about that in a press release. This is a country that should be protecting our embassy, not burning our flags. And why are we going to give them money? I say, let's withhold any money for Egypt until they start acting like a nation, protect our embassy, and start not fundamentally insulting us by burning our flags.
Claire McCaskill.
The war in Iraq was a mess. And when I went to Washington, I went with the eye of an auditor to look at something that my predecessor in this seat felt pretty strongly about, and that was war profiteering. I can assure you Harry Truman is spinning in his grave over what went on in Iraq. Congressman Akin wouldn't even vote to require competitive contracts in Iraq for the oil infrastructure. I helped establish the War Contracting Commission when I got to Washington. I went to Iraq and Afghanistan on contracting oversight. No one had paid much attention to this. We found in the War Contracting Commission $60 billion. Keep in mind, that's almost 3 years of the entire Missouri budget that just went up in smoke, in waste, fraud, abuse. No one was minding the store. We have now begun to clean that up. In Afghanistan, I support the mission of training their police and their army, but what we're doing in terms of spending our money on infrastructure is wrong. We are now doing the same thing in Afghanistan that we did in Iraq. We're investing in highways, power plants, water projects that they cannot maintain, they can't afford to sustain, and many times they're getting blown up or not used because they don't have the expertise. We need to pull that infrastructure money out, it's billions of dollars, and bring it back to the United States of America, where we need roads and bridges. We need a big bridge near Washington, Missouri, that the people of Bill Miller's community talk to me about all the time. We need more highways here in Missouri. We need lock and dam projects on the Missouri River. We should be building those projects here, not in the desert in Afghanistan in a country that can't afford them. So I disagree with that.
Congressman Akin, the senator, mentioned something about your position on competitive contracts in Iraq. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, the situation is that I believe competitive bidding is a good thing, essentially. What you had going in Iraq is pretty interesting, though, because you had people that were terrorists, and anything anybody did, they were going to blow it up or shoot anybody associated with it. And so the whole contracting and bidding process in Iraq is a little bit unique and unlike anything that we normally see. And of course, the attacks on the idea of roads in Afghanistan, the purpose of that is the big economy in Afghanistan is heroin. And heroin you can put on a motorcycle and take somewhere. If you don't have roads, you have no way to grow other crops other than heroin. There's some logic. Look, I've had a kid serving in Afghanistan. I've had a kid almost killed in Iraq in Fallujah. I understand the cost of what we're doing, and I want to do it the right way because I have skin in the game, you might say.
Senator McCaskill, did you want an additional 45 seconds there?
Well, there was nothing about the contracting in Iraq that didn't require a competitive look. There was nothing about the contracting that shouldn't have been. And by the way, after all these things were exposed, they finally did begin to compete these contracts. They were doing cost-plus contracts in Iraq. They were monogramming hand towels to drive up the cost of the hand towels to the American government. Can you imagine what Harry Truman would have said to those guys? I think he would have used language that was not polite. That was the contract, the famous Halliburton KBR contract that they completely took advantage of the American people on. This was a bill that would have required competitive bidding on those kinds of contracts, and Congressman Akin voted no.
Okay, the next question comes from Jeff Fox and goes first to Congressman Todd Akin.
The Simpson-Bowles Commission on the federal deficit recommended several things: that the country cut the federal workforce through attrition and freeze pay, that it close overseas military bases, cap spending at home, raise the gasoline tax, curtail the mortgage interest deduction, set aside a fund for natural disasters, raise the payroll tax for Social Security, and phase in higher retirement age, reduce entitlements as well as farm subsidies and civilian and military pensions, and it recommended a lower but more broadly and fairly collected system of taxation. Why hasn't this become at least the beginning of a serious discussion about reducing the federal deficit?
Well, I think it was a starting point, and there are a lot of good ideas in that particular commission. But what we're really stuck with is ultimately you have to put the whole thing into a budget to make it work. So you have to balance those different component elements and say, what's a reasonable approach? It's a little bit like what families have to do. And in the 2 years that Republicans have controlled the House, we've had a budget both years. The budget has been set up for a vote, and the budget has passed. Was it the budget that I would have written? No. It wasn't quite as conservative as I would have written, because I would like to see us get to a balanced budget sooner. But it was still a reasonable approach that puts us back on track to recovery. Those budgets, of course, go where? To the Senate. What happens when we send bills to the Senate? They die. The budget sat in the Senate and died. The other budget sat in the Senate and died. We got 30 bills to try to help jobs in the economy. They're sitting in the Senate and died. That's the reason I'm running for the Senate, because the Senate can't get anything done. And it's a federal law that we're supposed to have a budget every year, and the Senate can't do that. And I don't think the debt ceiling increase and another 10%, the sequestration on defense, is a good excuse for not doing what the law says, which is to pass a budget.
Claire McCaskill?
Well, I agree with Congressman Akin that the Simpson-Bowles proposal has some good ideas in it. And we need to work off that framework. In fact, that was the framework that the President and Speaker Boehner were working off of when they got an agreement last summer prior to us passing a budget in the law, in the Budget Control Act. And they were going to try to move $4 to $5 trillion of debt off the books with a compromise. The Tea Party in the House shut it down and said, no, we're not going to go for that compromise. We are working on a bipartisan basis in the Senate every day to try to cobble together a plan that will reduce $4 to $5 trillion in debt. And I'm part of that group. Yes, I think we do need to reduce some mortgage interest. I don't think anybody buys a second home because of the mortgage interest deduction. Let's start there. I think we should look at whether or not we can take a little haircut on charitable deductions. I think we need to look at cutting farm payments. In fact, we did. In the Farm Bill, we stopped all direct payments in the Farm Bill. We saved $23 billion in spending in a bipartisan Farm Bill that Senator Blunt and I worked hard on and worked together across the aisle with a lot of Republicans and Democrats, sent it over to the House. What is more important for certainty in Missouri than a Farm Bill? Our economy depends on it, and it's sitting in the House. It's sitting in the House with no action. And it expires in a matter of a few days. I think less than 6 or 7 days it expires. They didn't even take it up to vote on it. That's the kind of gridlock that we don't need in Washington.
Jonathan Dine.
I agree with a lot of the ideas in the commission, except for the gasoline tax. I think Americans already now pay enough at the pump. There's a 17-cent gallon tax on every gallon sold, which actually generates $100 million in revenue a day for the federal government. Just like anything else, it's mismanaged and spent recklessly. We should have really nice roads for that much money. I think that it doesn't go far enough. We really need, the reason I think a lot of those things were not implemented was something I think kind of covers America's political class, which is political cowardice. Afraid to take on the real issues because they are campaigning, because they are worried about re-election. You know, we do need to make some serious choices in this, if we do want to save what we have. You know, and I think it takes someone who's willing to say no to the reckless spending, say no to the corporate interests, someone who's willing to just work for the people and let the people keep the money in their pockets where it belongs.
Congressman Todd Akin, there were some issues raised about the Farm Bill and some other things. Would you like a rebuttal there?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it would straighten one thing out here, and that is I keep hearing that we passed a budget in the Senate. Look, we have not passed a budget in the Senate in 1,200 days. And increasing the debt ceiling is not the same thing as a budget. Increasing the debt ceiling, we do it over and over again, as though we can just keep spending money and keep printing money. We can't do that. But that bill also included what resulted in the sequestration. That is a second 10% cut in defense. And Panetta was asked, Panetta is the Secretary of Defense appointed by Obama. He's not some sort of Republican right-winger or anything. And he is asked, is this like shooting yourself in the foot? He said, no, this is like shooting yourself in the head. That's what Claire is bragging about, voting for that thing and calling it a budget. It's not a budget. It's a disaster.
Claire McCaskill.
I think I should use a phrase that's been used often, read the bill. I think Congressman Akin, if he'll read the bill, he'll find the language specifically that says this Act shall serve as the budget resolution for the fiscal year in question. It lays out the fiscal year. And then there's another phrase. This act shall serve as the budget resolution, and it lays out the next year. And then you can read the bill. You can read the budget in the bill. Go on my website. You can read it. It's there. It's in the law. And guess what happened this year? The appropriators followed it. The appropriators followed it. We cut direct payments, which was hard for many Missouri farmers to swallow, but we did it. It was a hard vote in the Senate. We did it on a bipartisan basis. The Farm Bill is essential to Missouri. We need to get at the work of getting the Farm Bill done.
Jonathan Dine, did you want 45 seconds on the deficit?
I'm okay.
Okay. This is going to have to be our last question then. It will come from Nasim and go first to Claire McCaskill.
The Trust for America's Health projects that all states could reach or exceed an obesity rate of 44% in adults in 20 years, and the researchers estimate that the projected increase in obesity rates will cost the United States $550 billion between now and 2030. What policies, if any, do you believe the government should adopt to prevent rising healthcare costs caused by obesity-related diseases?
Well, I honestly think this is a place that the government should probably keep their big nose out. I don't think the government needs to be telling people what they should eat or what they should drink. I think that I understand it's a struggle. I'm a woman in her 50s. I've got 7 sizes of clothes in my closet. I go from one end to the other. I think encouraging, trying to set a good example, speaking out about it like Michelle Obama has done, how important it is for our kids to move, considering the importance of physical activity for our children in K through 12, making sure that we support and promote that in ways that are advisory only and not requirement. And also paying for prevention, making sure that people can go see their doctors and learn about the dangers of diabetes before they develop the adult onset of diabetes. If we can bring down diabetes in our adult population by just 10%, it is amazing what it does to the cost curve of our debt and deficit. So this is an important issue, but I would not be someone who thinks the government should get in the business of telling people what they should eat or drink.
Jonathan Dine?
The top 5 leading causes of death are all related to diet and lifestyle. Heart disease is actually the #1 cause of death in America. They're all preventable. Diet and exercise is something that can really make a big difference. I've been a personal trainer for 15 years. I help people motivate themselves to get out, get in shape, build muscle, and burn fat. It's something that anybody can do at any age, but somebody needs to be a role model. I think the government should make incentives, whether they be tax incentives, making gym memberships tax deductible, or personal trainers. But it is the #1 drain on our healthcare system overall. I think we do need to have some positive reinforcement instead of negative reinforcement like the government is so used to. Obesity does kill more people than war, murder, crime, drugs, and everything else combined. So if that's not a problem where the government should set a role model, I don't know what is.
Todd Akin.
All of us have things in our lives that are challenging. And for some people, obesity is one of them, but there are a lot of other things. And all of us are people. And all of us have to try to manage those things and try to do the best we can in the circumstances. But when the government starts to overstep and there's problems with jobs and all kinds of stresses, these problems then become a lot worse. And I agree, this is the first time I've agreed with Claire, this isn't something the federal government should do. Now the federal government's telling you what kind of light bulb to buy, how much water can come out of your shower, how much water can go down your toilet. You can't have any dust in the combine. I'm glad there's something that the federal government doesn't have to do and tell you what size drink cup that you're going to have. And but I think that this is part of just being Americans. This is part of basically living the dream in America, that we can challenge ourselves and to try, stumble and fall sometimes, get back up again and try some more. But I think we also have to have a love for each other because we're all Americans. We're all God's children. And we need to give people a hand when they need it or some encouragement when they need it. And so this is one of a whole series of things that I've kind of put in the category of self-government. the way that we run our own lives responsibly. And this is what's made America strong, is the fact that we're good at doing that here in America.
That is the end of our question and answer session. It's now time for our closing statements. As a reminder, the candidates each get 2 minutes, and we are starting with Congressman Todd Akin.
You know, America is an absolutely unique and great country. Sometimes we forget. We fought 2 world wars. We annexed no territory, crowned no kings or princes, and then we voted to tax ourselves to rebuild our enemies. How often has that happened in world history? We have the oldest written constitution. And then when there's a tsunami or an earthquake, we see the gray hull with the red, white, and blue proudly flying. And they've got medical supplies and foods going to help people all over the world. And this is who we are. We're Americans. And I think that suggests that we need to ask a question. What is the secret of America's greatness? And I would believe that it's pretty well captured by Jefferson when he said, we believe that there is a creator that gives us life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. The idea that God himself intended for your life to be protected, for you to have the liberty of free speech, to be able to go vote or to keep the things that you earn. And the pursuit of happiness, that's the essence of the American dream. That every single one of us are different, that we're all equally important, and each of us can go after whatever it was that we have in our hearts to do. And people will say to you, you can't do that, that won't work. And you know what? Americans prove them wrong, because we follow those dreams. And America has been built one dream at a time. And that makes us who we are. But you know what? That's being threatened and destroyed by people who are building Washington, D.C., not protecting life, not protecting liberty, taking so much money from people that they can't save what they earn. And so we have a choice. Do you want more Washington and big government, or do you want to protect the American dream and the freedom that it comes from, and recognize and honor that God himself intended us to have life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness? Thank you.
Claire McCaskill.
You know, we have a choice here. Not only a choice between 2 candidates that have a much different view, but also a choice of whether we look back and blame or whether we look forward and fix. Todd Akin loves America, and so do I. Todd Akin believes America is unique, and so do I. But we have a different view about how we get to that shining place on the mountain where everyone has an opportunity at success. We need certainty for our business community. How do we get certainty? Do we get it through gridlock, or do we get it through compromise? I am very proud that I am part of a group in the Senate that believes in bipartisan compromise. I have time and time again stood up to my party and worked with Republicans to move the ball forward on tough compromises that make a difference. He is part of the gridlock. Where is the Farm Bill? Where is the Postal Bill? Where are the bills that the Tea Party is trying to shut down because they refuse to allow them to go forward? I have worked with a long list of Republican senators. Senator Thune, Senator DeMint, Senator McCain, Senator Blunt, Senator Ayotte, Senator Sessions. All of these are things I've worked on with Republicans to cut spending and to make our spending more responsible. Lots of different bills. But Congressman Akin wants to go back. He wants to go back to the same policies that created this mess in the first place. He wants to go back to a policy where all you have to do is do another tax cut for the wealthy and everything's going to be fine. And absolutely no rules of the road for the greed of Wall Street. Cut veterans' benefits, but give another tax cut to Tom Brady. Eliminate student loans, but give another tax cut to the Koch brothers. Privatize Social Security and Medicare and put more costs on the back of seniors, but give another tax cut to the wealthiest wealthy of America. I don't think we have to do that. I don't think we have to go back. Let's go forward together and fix it.
Jonathan Dine.
In the last few decades, the federal government has exploded in size. No area of your life, your business, or your wallet is free from the meddling of politicians. It doesn't have to be this way. With a smaller government and more freedom, you could keep more of what you earn. You'd be easier to start a new business, build a new home, and fuel real economic growth. I believe we need more ordinary Americans to stand up and take an active role in government. I truly believe the political system would be better off if more credibility was given to libertarian and independent elected politicians. Although they might not come up with completely new stances, they're more likely to represent a combination of views and think outside the box. It's time we break up some of the stagnation of the two-party system. Like I said before, I come to you today not as a candidate for this office, but like many of you, a concerned American citizen who's worried about the direction of this country. I'm worried about the uncontrollable debt. I'm worried about the endless wars putting our young men and women in harm's way. I'm worried about the erosion of our civil liberties and personal freedoms here at home. You know, I'm not a fine-tuned, polished politician like my opponents, but I do have genuine qualities where I can see life from the ground level. So if you do support me, like I said before, you will be supporting a genuinely smaller government, lower tax level, and more personal freedom across the board. I promise to keep the Republicans out of your bedroom and the Democrats out of your wallet.
Well, that is all the time we have for our debate today. Let's give our